everyone. Good evening. I'm Karen McNeil, author of the Wine Bible and editor of the digital newsletter Wine Speed. And this is a live virtual tasting of one of the wine world's, I think, best kept secrets. And that is the wines of New York State. Tonight, we are certainly in a New York state of mind. And if you're with me on the Pacific coast, then it's an afternoon tasting, which is also pretty wonderful. So I want to start by saying, that the words New York often conjure up images of one of the world's most high-powered cities, huge skyscrapers. But there's another New York too, the New York of cornfields and potato fields and meadows and beautiful blue lakes and mountains. In fact, much of New York State is just magnificently rural. No surprise that grapes have been grown here since the time of the 13 colonies, but, and this is, I think, really important for our discussion today, the modern New York wine industry is really very different than the New York wine industry was even 30 years ago. Let me tell you who's joining me tonight. Nadine Brown, there she is. Nadine is a 20-year veteran of the Washington, D.C. restaurant industry. She spent more than a decade at Charlie Palmer Steak as the wine director and sommelier, and now has her own company called At Your Service, which specializes in wine events, cellar management, and wine promotions. Titus Green is a sommelier and the assistant wine director at Del Frisco's Double Eagle, also in Washington, D.C. He is at the certified level in the Court of Master Sommeliers and is an active wine judge, as is Nadine. And you know me, so welcome, everyone. Thank you again for joining us. Let me start right out our discussion, Titus and Nadine, by saying that, as you know, right up until the 1970s, I'd say, people thought about New York as a place where hybrids grew. Hybrids were and are very cold tolerant, and there are a lot of cool hybrid wines around. And we have the Ukrainian Dr. Konstantin Frank to thank for this. As of the 1950s, Dr. Frank proved that New York could also make stellar wine from Vitis vinifera grapes, which includes all the grapes that we commonly know as making great wine, from Riesling to Cabernet. So if I may, let me start by asking each of you, what do you think New York wine offers to wine drinking consumers? If someone walked up to you and said, why should I drink New York wine? What would you say? Nadine?
Yeah, I think, first of all, thanks for having me. I'm really excited to taste through all of these wines. Charlie Palmer was an all-American wine list, really extensive wines from a lot of different states. And New York wines really go with food. You were talking about the region and the agriculture, and the wines, tend to be just really well balanced, really approachable for the most part. But I think of them as food wines.
All right, good. And Titus, jump in here. What would you say?
I have to certainly agree with Nadine. The approachability, the climate factor brings these wines right to a table or right to a porch, and they're very easily drinkable. Lots of people have a various amount of foods that are going to pair very, very well with them. But most importantly, they have a diversity in the wines and the wine grapes that they grow. So lots of different offers.
Yeah, well, we'll explore each of those avenues in a minute. I want to say that I want to establish really that New York has a number of wine growing regions, 7 actually, and tonight we'll be tasting wines from 2 of those regions, the very famous Finger Lakes, and also one of the earliest wine growing regions in the entire United States, the Hudson Valley. Let's launch in and taste these wines. The first wine we've asked Nadine to give us a little background on. I'm going to hold this up so that everyone can see what it looks like. This is the MILLBROOK Tocai Friulano from the Hudson Valley, 2021 vintage. Nadine, tell us about this winery, this wine, and your take on it, what you think about it.
Yeah, it is sincerely one of my favorite wines in the wine world. I used to pour this by the glass at Charlie Palmer years ago. It is, we were talking about the fruit of the agriculture in Hudson Valley. And Hudson Valley has the longest running vineyard, like continuously running vineyard and winery in all of the US, like you said. So a lot of history. Tocai Friulano is from Friuli region of Italy, where it's really just referred to as Friulano right now, you know, dropping the Tocai. It is, you know, sometimes we try and compare wines to other varietals. This is tough. I mean, it has some of the aromatics of Viognier to me, that bright acidity of Sauvignon Blanc, but it is, you know, its own thing. I like pairing it with cheese, you know, hard cheeses. You know, we talk a lot about we think about red wine and cheese a lot, and there's some that work, but white wine actually works better with cheeses at times, especially those Italian style cheeses. And this one really just begs for pecorino and just, you know, different types of cheeses. And it's different. You know, I also like bringing something different to the table, or if you're going to a dinner party, introducing wine lovers to something they haven't had before.
Man, thank you for bringing up the idea of white wine and cheese. White wine and cheese is such a good pairing that God knows how red wine and cheese ever nudged its way in, right? I mean, thank you for that. I don't think we've ever had anyone state it so perfectly and dramatically as you did, Nadine. Thank you. I love the Sauvignon Blanc idea, because I think you're right. And in fact, Friulano, way back, you know, parents, and Sauvignon Blanc are probably distantly related. And that, you know, that nervy line of acidity in the wine is right there. What's your take on this wine, Titus?
You know, with the climate factors on this, it is just ready to drink immediately. And I'm a huge component of cheese. I'm going to take this after we're done, and I'm going to hang out back a little bit, you know, because the weather has been calming down. But the acidity on this is like lingering. The pairings that you can do with this outside the cheese, because we know we love cheese, right? I'm thinking of some of the white meats that we could use. But most importantly, some of the notes on this is pretty outstanding. Like Nadine said, and just giving a little bit of history on the grape itself and where it came from, it's perfect for New York. I'm loving it. And I know without a doubt that some of the notes on this right here are outstanding. So lots of just bright yellow flowers and white flowers and some very natural kind of like citrus notes.
You know, it might be sort of the power of suggestion, because Friulano, as Nadine pointed out, is from that northeastern corner of Italy called Friuli Venezia Giulia. And that was once the overland spice route from the Byzantine Empire into Italy. And the cuisine there is very spicy relative to other cuisines in Italy, and a little exotic. And so I don't know, maybe it is the power of suggestion, but I pick up a lot of like pinpoints of white pepper or salt or something there that I think underscores what Nadine is saying about its food applicability, really. Let me remind everyone that we're taking questions. So if you have a question, please just put it in the question and answer box, your question, not your answer, or in the chat box, and we will do our best. All right, well, I think I'm up next on the boundary breaks. Let me hold up the boundary breaks so that everyone can see this label. This is Boundary Breaks Riesling called 239. Boundary Breaks is a pretty new winery. Its first vintage was 2013. And Bruce Murray and Diana Little, who are the owners, the husband and wife team who are owners, are total Riesling fanatics. I mean, you can really tell, excuse me, when you taste their wines, but also when you read what they write about their wines. They're located on Seneca Lake, one of the 11 Finger Lakes, and one of the deepest at 700 feet and biggest. And the reason that's important is because, as everyone who studies a bit of viticulture knows, lakes have a very enormous moderating influence on temperature. So you can be in a cold northern climate, but if you're near a lake, you get enough warmth actually emanating off the lake to result in really ripe grapes. And the reflection of light off the lake is a factor as well. So Bruce was in publishing. Diana was a high school science teacher. I don't think I could have passed her science class in high school, but man, this wine, I really can talk to this wine. Dry, bone dry. Most New York State Rieslings are bone dry, very racy, very crisp, really, I don't know, the word that comes to mind for me is kinetic, right? Really alive. Nadine, give me your take on the Boundary Breaks.
Everything you said, the first that it really comes right down the mid palate, you know, and I don't know if you ever taste a wine, you do a little shiver. You know, it's alive, and I think we forget that wine is a living, breathing thing, and this definitely brings that to light. It's really bright, but it has a lot of depth. It's one that I think will age a little bit. You know, I'm really curious to taste this in a couple years. Yeah, it's gorgeous.
Yeah, I have to agree.
Jump in there. Go ahead.
No, I was just thinking about the Riesling and how gorgeous it is, and how I said earlier that I don't get an opportunity. I don't take time out, honestly, to drink enough Riesling, but they are so versatile and you can do a lot of different things with them. Obviously, they do a lot of bone dry Rieslings there. But at the same time, though, this Riesling is quite racy, and it's very, very, it has a decent amount of body on it too, to still be kind of light in its way. Loving the notes on this as well. And obviously, with the climate factors that play with this, it's perfect. You know, thinking about what a Riesling and what we expect with a Riesling and what the textbooks say on the Riesling, this might not be exactly that, but what they did with this is immaculate. Yeah,
immaculate is a beautiful word, because Riesling rarely, in fact, I mean, like rarely, 0.001%, does it ever see any oak. And so, you know, it has that purity of, I don't know, I always remember being a kid and sort of sitting in a mountain stream, you know, that sense of really pure, clean, refreshing water. We have a couple of questions coming in. Galen is saying, why do Italian wines go so well with food? This is I think you mean Italy, if you have the IT. Let me see if I can take that around to New York, which is the wines that go best with food, but I'm going to say this carefully because I'm in the presence of two top sommeliers. I think what makes wine go well with food is acidity. And right, that's what we're seeing. That's what we see in a lot of Italian wines. And that's what we're seeing with these New York State wines tonight. Would you agree? Acidity?
I'm loving the acidity on this. I'm sorry, Nadine, if I cut you off, but I'm loving the acidity on this. And that acidity is so valuable in so many things, because she was talking about the ageability. So that's going to carry this on. If, you know, seeing a little bit of a neutral oak on this, if I'm not mistaking myself right now, just from some of the notes, but that acidity is lingering as well. It's in the back. It's still there. I took a sip probably 45 seconds ago, and I can still have the effects of it going on, which is going to be great with a lot of different things, as far as you know, enjoying just being refreshing in itself, and then obviously pairing with foods, especially some of those harder cheeses that pair up something good with this, and just kind of helping kind of clean that palate as you sip on it.
Yeah, Hello, our woofy friend, wherever you are. Nadine, I think that was a vote for Riesling right there. Okay.
It's such a well-made wine. I mean, it's either oak or like sitting on the lees for a long time. There's definitely just a gorgeous texture to the wine, you know, absolutely shellfish and stuff, but you could do like duck or pork dish with it, you know, just talking about, you don't always have to do a red wine with, you know, with red meat kind of thing. It's just a gorgeous wine.
Yeah, that's another really important point. You know, if we think about places like Alsace or Germany or Austria, all of which also specialize in Riesling as the Finger Lakes do, main dishes in those areas are pork based, right? They are meat dishes. You know, I think we often say Riesling, it's just for salads or sometimes cuisine, fair enough. But Riesling and pork is one of the world's great dynamic marriages. Catherine is writing in saying, I'm detecting salinity mid-palate in this Riesling. What causes that impression? Do either of you want to go on that?
I think it's a lot of times soil. You know, there's some things in the winemaking, but salinity is, for me, is place. You know, we're not talking about Scott, but I usually use Scotland, you know, where the barrels are right outside, the waves banging against them. So that salinity is terroir and soil in winemaking and variety and grape variety as well at times.
Okay, and Titus?
Absolutely. That's, you know, that mineral aspect that's coming from, like she said, the sense of place. So, you know, not the winemaking factors that we are creating after we create that, you know, magnificent juice, but what's happening in the farming, in the farming portion, which is obviously soil, your rocks, a lot of draining soils there. So you're going to give a lot of runoff on those rocks, and it's going to be right into those vines.
Yeah. You know, salinity, we should sort of quickly establish that there's no actual salt in wine, right? There's no Na sodium. If you're on a sodium-free diet, don't worry about drinking wine. So there's no actual Na, but the presence of a feeling of salinity, which is a manifestation, I'm with Titus here, that it's a manifestation of a kind of mineralness, is one of the best things that a wine can have, not only because it's reflective of terroir, as Nadine is pointing out, although I think I agree with her about that, but I think it also goes back to food compatibility, because, you know, if you think about why do we put salt on heirloom tomatoes or chicken or anything, it's because salt amplifies the flavors around it. So to drink a wine like this Boundary Breaks with all that salinity has the effect of acting like salt, amplifying flavors.
Yeah. You know, Karen, that makes me kind of go back to what Nadine said about having this Riesling a few years down the road, because of, you know, ancient days, they would use salt to preserve food, you know, and that minerality in here, along with a couple other factors, is going to take this down the road into a whole nother light. Like, it's drinking amazingly now, but some of the characteristics will develop and just, you know, be phenomenal. And it's already a great wine.
Yeah, we have a comment coming in from Deborah saying that, is it best to drink these wines young, or can they be put down? I think both of you have already spoken a bit to the idea that they can be put down. I would vote for drinking them young, but I would also say that the fact that they can age is inherently a good thing. Even when you drink a wine young, the fact that it can age means that it has to be more than just a simple wine, has to be a little bit better than just a simple wine, because a simple wine couldn't age. So even when you drink your wines young, you should always buy wines that can age.
Yeah. This is why we buy a case of wine.
Thank you. Yes, that's right. Absolutely. So Carrie is saying, can you talk about the petrol characteristic that occurs in older Rieslings? I love it, but it's not for everyone. You're talking about a compound, Carrie, called TDN. If I could say its entire chemical name, I would. But those of us in the wine business just know it as TDN because it's, it's a foot long, the name. And it often happens in Riesling that has too much sun on the grape clusters. And is that too much sun or not enough sun? Not enough sun on the grape clusters. So, I don't see it so much in New York State wine, but you do see it often in particular, old vineyards in Germany. Like you, I love that flavor. I know I'm in the world of Riesling if I feel that sense. And petrol is not really a good word for it because petrol sounds so bad. But those of us in the biz know that it's actually a really delicious, hard to describe flavor. I don't know. Help me, guys. What would you say?
No, I concur to all of that. It is great when you get it blind. Both of us have been in the testing, when you're sitting and trying to guess or decipher what it is. It can be a telltale sign for German Riesling, which is also helpful. But it's I think one of the things I love about wine, I love wines that are complex and layered, and having a variety of profiles. I think Riesling, people kind of pigeonhole Rieslings and don't realize that there is a whole spectrum from bone dry, right, all the way to like dessert wines that will age for 50 years. So that's one of the the joys about Riesling.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm going to take it in another aspect and say that that petrol aspect, being geeky in wine, we kind of like, ooh, we smell this, we smell that, we taste this, we taste that. Probably one of my favorite things to do when introducing someone to a wine, especially a Riesling, an old world style Riesling that has that characteristic, is most of the time they don't even recognize it. And after they enjoy it for a bit, I come back and I'm like, smell this again. And then I'll share that with them. But that usually, creates a new fan in wine to where their sense of smell and their taste and their quality of wine increases because they're looking and they're finding more characteristics of wine. So I love it for that factor, and probably could talk about it on other things as well. But that's probably my favorite thing to do out on the floor and, talking about wine, and especially introducing it to new people that are not familiar with some of the common terms that we, get spoiled over sometimes. So, yeah.
All right. Let's move on because we want to also taste this HOSMER. This is the HOSMER Rosé of Cabernet Franc, and it's a dry rosé, the 2021 vintage. And Titus, we want you to kind of lead us into this wine.
I'm a huge component of rosé. I love a great rosé day, or a rosé, soiree and different things like that. And I'm happy that I got this wine because I love the Cab Franc rosé. And Cab Franc, before it even becomes a rosé, it's the type of grape that can thrive in New York. It thrives big time. And a lot of people may or may not know that. But it has its own characteristics when it's a red wine. But when we make this rosé, I just love the style of color here. It has this nice, soft, not so much salmon, but more of a light pink sort of color to it. And the HOSMER vineyards have some pretty old vines when it comes to this Cab Franc. But when I smell this and I taste this, I get exactly that. I get the red, the pink flower. I get the strawberry. I get the berries. It also, with that Cab Franc, it has this underlying mid to late palate undertone of truffle and a little bit of that flora slightly on it. You can almost pick it up on the nose as well. But in general, I love a rosé wine. This wine right here could do so many different things with so many different foods.
Mm.
Mm. Really loving the fact that I can sit here and drink it all day and probably not say anything at all to anyone and just enjoy the wine itself. So that being said, the Finger Lake area, having quality, soils and wine management, the HOSMER vineyards are obviously, they know what they're doing here, and they have a heck of a portfolio of wines that they're doing. And I got a chance to try a lot of those this week, and very impressed with the wines that they do, and even their Cab Franc. You got to have a good Cab Franc first before you have a rosé.
They have Cab Franc. And so we should say that, Cabernet Franc, which is the father of Cabernet Sauvignon, is originally from Spain, interestingly enough, not from Bordeaux. But it's well established in maritime regions near water, even lakes like the Finger Lakes, and in relatively cool regions, the Loire Valley and the Finger Lakes and cooler parts of California. But it's kind of like a Pinot Noir version of Cabernet Sauvignon in the sense that, not in its flavor, but only in the sense that it's very site specific. A grower once said to me, Cabernet Franc will tell you where it wants to grow, because if it doesn't like its site, forget it. The wine is like absolutely just awful. So only, I think you're right about the HOSMER here. You have to have courage to grow Cabernet Franc, and you absolutely have to be in the right site, or you just give up, right? You'd abandon it. You would start with something else. Nadine, what's your take on this wine?
It's gorgeous. It's almost like a light red wine. It has a bit of body to it. Definitely you can see from the color, it has a little bit more skin contact. So it's not that it has skin tannins, but there's a little grip to the wine. I love Cabernet Franc, and like you were saying, if it's not done right, it can have like this green pepper taste to it, which is why I think some people think they don't like Cab Franc, but they need to just keep trying different ones. Like you said, the Loire, it does really well in New York State, and they're making Cab Franc pet nats. I mean, they're doing really innovative things with the grape. It's almost hard I get some like watermelon rind on this, it's hard to pull out all the descriptors, wild strawberries. There's just a wildness to the wine. I had this pizza recently, this trifecta of caramelized onions, gorgonzola cheese, and like bacon lardons, which would go well. It's so good. It is so good. But all of these wines are making me think of, that it's a little funky, it's a little sweet, it's a little, and then you got the pizza crust. It's good on steak. It's just this great trifecta of those three things that I think is really different. And I'd love to have that with some of this wine. I'm reading on the bottle here that they were established in 1985. MILLBROOK was 1983, so all of these wineries are celebrating, 30, 40 years. So they know what they're doing, and you can taste it in the wines.
Yeah. Thank you for that beautiful description. And send pizza, please. Something you just said, though, reminded me of when you mentioned the word green. I mean, I think if there's one of the things, if we people in the wine business could share with a larger audience, it would be that green is not a single thing, right? There's green like asparagus water. There's green like green beans. But then there's also something that is more like sage or rosemary or green peppercorns. And I was thinking about green, because both of you have worked for some part of your careers in steakhouses. I'm thinking about green peppercorns cracked on a steak and how great those green peppercorns can be. And so in this wine, I don't get vegetative green or even herbal green, but more this sort of spicy green peppercorn character.
Yeah, I can definitely agree to that. And kind of what Nadine said earlier too, just kind of having some of those wines that people have had and they haven't found the one that they like. This is the type of style of a Cab Franc rosé that you could easily, gravitate to, and you could begin to expand your palate into different things. And sometimes wines are made great, and sometimes they are not. And sometimes we know, sometimes we may not. It's one of those things where you got to take some time out and just taste more wines. And I'm a huge component. I like to say a lot of the places that don't get a lot of love on their wines, but they're doing it very, very well. And New York is definitely one of those places. They've been around, like Nadine said, 30, 40 years, and they know what they're doing. It's just a matter of sharing more wines and drinking more New York wines.
Well, and you know what I guess allows for that too, Titus, is that the wines are pretty much steals, right? I mean, it's one thing when you're wanting to learn about wine and you're buying, I don't know, a $60, $70, $80 or more wine. It's pretty hard, man. You've sunk a lot of cash into liking that wine. But these three wines, and New York State wines in general, come in a really modest price, often between about 18 and let's say $25 a bottle. That's where all three of these are. And that doesn't hurt so much, right? You really can afford to experiment a little bit and try around. Don't you both think?
100%. I mean, and they really worked well, and part of why they were in my wine program, just being able to offer, it's really important to being able to offer, guests a range of styles and prices and wines from places they wouldn't normally think about.
Yeah.
Nadine, got Antonio saying, by the way, I love the idea of watermelon rind. Okay, good. Me too. Titus, go ahead. I'm sorry I interrupted.
No, you're fine. I was just saying, depending upon how you got into wine, specifically, everyone has a different story. But once you get into it, we all want to drink the cool wines that we see, but everyday wines and finding something that you can, be able to share and be able to enjoy, more than once in your life is important. Because otherwise you won't be able to drink that many wines. And, when you have a great price point that way, you can share these with anyone. Like Nadine said, she had it as by the glass wine. That's something you're pouring every day to guests every single day. And you're putting it, out there and you're having them represent it very well. So,
yeah.
Important.
I think about, let's just say the average price of these three is $20 or so. That is what? That's about $4 a glass. I know people in New York who spend more than that on lattes at Starbucks every day.
Right.
I mean, we forget sometimes that a bottle serves 5 people, a standard pour. So really a $20 wine, $4 a glass, that's a very reasonable amount of money given how hard it is to make wine, how time consuming, and how financially difficult it is for any winery to make beautiful wines. It's actually a remarkable price. Sometimes I think, how do they even do it, right? It should almost cost more.
Right. I remember seeing, it was probably about almost a decade ago now, that on average, California wines to make them were like $27 or something like that on average through all the wineries, So, the more we, share wines that we love, the price increases. So sometimes it's a good thing, like we're like, hey, we love the New York wines. And then the New York wines, next thing you know, they're like, going up and going up, which isn't a bad thing. But at the same time, their hard work and a dedication that goes into making a glass and a bottle of wine, there's a lot of hands, it's a lot of people, it's a lot of sweat, it's a lot of sun, it's a lot of long nights and long days to go into it. But having it at that price right there, it's amazing. So.
Yeah, and I think just real briefly, a big part of why I love this wine, which is why I had to buy the glass. I had to buy the glass because people were sometimes hesitant of going for the bottle. So, it was open, you could taste it, and then they could then order the bottle. Titus and I were just at a tasting of New York State wines, and there were 2 winemakers down. But just to talk about the people behind the wines and the labor of love. And that is sincerely another why you should support these wines. They're delicious wines, but they're small farmers, families. There's this image of, the millionaire winemaker out on his yacht, but no, they're running from town to town, selling their wines, running after, planes and stuff. That it's agriculture, it's farming, it's biting your nails because of the weather. So another really, really important reason to support them. And I think it's something that's becoming more important it's something that's becoming more important to wine drinkers. Like, where's the wine from? How are they treating the people making the wines? And New York State has always and really leading that important part of the story.
Very important part of the story, a real values-based consideration of what you're drinking and who you're supporting and what are those people supporting. They're, as you point out, these 3 wines are made by small entities that are keeping land in agriculture and fostering the sustainability of those lands. We have an interesting comment from T. Joseph. Do any of you feel there is some level of connection to apple country that is big in New York State? So let's address that. Any connection there? Let me say, I'll start off because I, as a journalist, was told not so long ago, writing the Washington State chapter for the Wine Bible, that any place that can grow beautiful apples, really crisp, crunchy, just bite into that great apple, any place that can do that also makes great grapes. And this was old farmer wisdom. So yes, it was told to me by a Washington person, but New York State is the same. And I had never heard this piece of old farmer wisdom. Have either of you made any connection between apples?
I have heard that 2 times. My grandfather, we had a big apple tree in his yard. And he basically, that's a old school classic, if you've been out on a farm, this is the type of thing that you look for. You look for those orchard areas, and that tells you a little bit about your land. If you aren't really familiar with your soil and you're not familiar with what's going on underneath that grass. But, if you have nutrients and your soil is proper and it's fertile, sometimes you can kind of look and see, like, what's your backyard look like? If you take a look outside, like, what's your backyard look like? It's the same thing. And, that Washington area, that New York area, they both have just outstanding climates. And, I think a lot of people will go back, maybe even, some of the great winemakers and say things like, maybe I should have experimented more out there in those areas because, they are different and they are very relatable to different grapes. But obviously we have some great wines here that, maybe they could have done something as well. So the people that are there doing it right now, they are definitely on to it. So they understand it.
Nicely said. Nadine, want to jump in on that?
Yeah, it makes sense, that apples would be happy. I know there are a number of cideries in New York. And cider is, we're definitely going and living in a period where everything old is new again. You know, cider was, I think, second after ale in terms of popularity in this country, you know, way back when, and cider is becoming popular again. You know, it's just yummy and really great with food.
I think I lost my connection there for a
No
second.
worries. No worries.
I was just trying to keep the two of you on your toes, you know? Okay, you guys, take it from here.
Yeah, no, but just one thing about food, you know, it's great with food. Someone had asked about what makes these wines great with food. You know, the most important thing is what you like, right? Whatever you like is what's great with food. But you can drink more of these wines, right? And the acid really cleanses your palate in between bites. So just another reason why they're so great with food.
Yeah. And I saw a comment hop up there. It was from someone that I know. Matt said something. I don't know what it said, but I will say, you know, along with him and a few others, we did a blind tasting for a championship, and it was with Rieslings. We had Virginia Riesling, Germany Riesling, and New York. And one of the top wines was from the DC winery, and another one though was from New York, which was pivotal because we all thought it was from Germany. So the representation of what they can do and kind of implementing all their values and what they have in New York and representing something like that was pretty amazing, because we had some pretty outstanding palettes around those tables and doing that. And like I said, we do that type of stuff for fun. That's geeky wine fun, you know? But it was mind blowing. It was really mind blowing to actually have that. And I know Nadine judges wines, and, you know, she has an extraordinary palate. But to kind of have that opportunity in your face, it tells you a lot about what we have in these bottles that represents New York wines.
Yeah. Well, beautifully said. And I want to thank you both for joining me to explore the MILLBROOK, Tocai Friulano, the Boundary Breaks Riesling, and the HOSMER dry rosé of Cabernet Franc. It's been really fun to be with both of you. Thank you so much. And thank you to everyone who has joined us. I know a lot of you have been tasting along, or maybe have been marking down a few thoughts about wines you want to grab for this weekend. So cheers to everyone who has been joining us as well. Thanks, guys. I'm Karen McNeil. See you next time.